Today on Co-op for Two, an in-depth review and discussion of Oltree, a game where we were surprised by everything. You are watching Co-op for Two. I'm Jesse. I'm here with Greg.
Thanks for having me on your channel. So first we should say there's going to be no spoilers in this whole discussion. So if you're worried about spoilers, we're not going to have one. Right, Jesse?
Well, maybe a little.
No spoilers.
No spoilers, okay.
So let's go down to the table and see how it's played.
In Oltree, players work together to defend their province amid a flurry of incidents and problems while playing through one of 6 different replayable, story-driven scenarios. Oltree was designed by Antoine Bauza and John Grumpf, with art by Vincent Dutray, and was published by Studio H in 2021. The box lists a 60-minute game time and supports 2 to 4 players. Oltree combines modular decks of cards to create a scenario-based experience. Players begin by choosing characters and one of 6 chronicle decks, which represent independent, replayable, story-driven narratives. They then choose an assignment card and construct an incident deck associated with that assignment card. In addition to introducing different narrative elements and challenges, different assignment cards are rated at different difficulty levels and will require players to achieve different goals, adding replayability and variability, and requiring players to adopt different strategies even when replaying the same scenario. Each player will play one of 8 different Ranger role cards with unique powers and a health bar that will need to be maintained in order to preserve their unique power. The game board itself is divided into 8 regions surrounded by a central fortress. Players travel to different regions in order to accomplish goals, gather resources, and resolve incidents and problems. Players will also track the defense and prestige levels of the province during the game. Players lose the game early if their fortress defense or prestige tracks reach 0. At the start of each turn, a player rolls the adversity die and either adds new incidents or problems to a random region or triggers an event or the advancement of the chronicle story. As the board fills up with problem cards, region actions become unusable. As it fills up with incident cards, regions become in peril and cause an increasingly rapid loss of prestige. A game turn consists of performing 2 different actions, which include moving to an adjacent region, activating the action associated with the region, such as gathering specific resources or increasing the defense or prestige levels of the province, constructing or repairing buildings that improve player abilities, or towers that help secure regions and accomplish assignment goals. Resolving an incident or problem in a region, which may require a dice skill test, the expenditure of some resources, or simply making a narrative decision between some story options. The final stage of the game happens as players reach the end of the Chronicle story deck they have chosen to play and face a final challenge. The challenge will be easier or harder depending on how many assignment goals the players were able to successfully complete during the game. And the game will end in either a defeat, a minor victory, or a major victory.
This is our long deep dive discussion, which if you want a short video, we have a 5-minute-ish before you buy. You can watch that. We also have a playthrough, so if you want to watch us play through the first scenario, the intro scenario, that's available as well. But this is kind of like, I've come to think of them as our, like, after you play the game, or
if you want someone to talk to, like if you don't have a good person to talk to about the games, you're all excited after you play it, this would be a good video to watch.
So like my wife, will finish a game and I'll be like, what was interesting about this game is the way that it's like a seesaw. So I'll start talking about it and she'll be like, that's what you have Jesse for. I don't even have like a 45-minute conversation about the mechanisms in this game. So that's kind of what this
Normally when you tell that little joke story, you and Jill are in bed and she's like, I don't want to go to sleep.
Yeah. I'm trying to go to sleep. Okay, so going into this game, I was quite excited because Antoine Bauza is the co-designer of this game, and he's one of my favorite designers, top 3 probably. He's done Ghost Stories, Hanabi, those are 2 of my favorites. He's done a host of others that we're not going to go into. And then the artist is Vincent
Dutrey.
which I hope that he's pronounced that right. I shoved that off to Jesse there. He's a phenomenal artist. Lewis and Clark, another one of my favorite games. He did the art for that. He's also done the art for Robinson Crusoe and Atlantis Rising, which should be
That's right.
Atlantis Sinking for those keeping score. Yeah, so it's also a bit of a modern board game. I think it's like one of those Frankenstein games where we kind of talked about when we reviewed our lengthy discussion about Endangered, where it's like you could just see all these other games. And I'm gonna talk. I've got like 20 different games where I'm like, this is kind of like this and that. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to start where it's almost where you ended with Vincent Dutrey. So some kind of deal with the devil was made with Dutrey, with the art in this game, because it is so over the top and it's everywhere. It's like on box sides. Show them the inside of the box. Like they have. Bowser has some sort of leverage, blackmail or something. Like there's art everywhere. These pieces open up. There's art on every card, like full-size pictures. And I mean, it's amazing art. He is an amazing artist, but just the sheer quantity of art is beyond.
There's that Napoleon quote, quality is a quantity, or quantity is a quality all of its own, and this is definitely in this one.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And just even beyond the art, just the components, these wood laser cut things you were talking about, like you noticed every horse for each player is different. It's a different design. It matches the characters.
Yeah, so before we move on from this real fast, this is, I've never seen this in any game ever. I mean, first of all, you see a lot of these meeples now that like have an image on them and they're cut in a specific way. But just the fact that there's I mean, look at this little cutout here. Right in that little space, and each of these is a different...
Full color, double-sided, matches the character.
They're very large, and it matches the art on the character. It's pretty bonkers, actually. It's like a meeple on steroids. Really, I mean, it's like leveled up several times.
And these nice, chunky wooden pieces, they're all double... It's like no expense was spared with this game. Yeah. You were saying, like, it looks like a Kickstarter exclusive. It looks like what you would find on Kickstarter.
If somebody brought this game to game night and they opened it up, you would think, like, oh, clearly that's the Kickstarter version that has extra stuff. Because that's, I mean, just, if I may, you would pay an upgrade fee. I mean, I think they're like $50 for like, or $40 or $50. They're expensive for Agricola, Caverna, and that stuff where it's got like the, wood pieces shaped like, look at this. These are all shaped interesting, and they have the stickers on them. They're
color. It's just crazy.
Like, look at this leaf. Look at that leaf. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And then, you have that. You've got the hearts, which are not only stickered, but shaped like a heart. Yeah. It's pretty neat.
And there's art on these chronicles. You want to show the first page?
Yeah, so we'll show the first page. It's not going to give anything away. There's just a picture of a castle. But when you open this up, it's made like a book, like Arkham Horror, the card game, has. You open it up like a book, and it really does look like a fairy tale book, like you would see in one of those old
all the detail around the edges look like a medieval manuscript.
Yeah, and the big letter there, which is so evocative of that, like, that fairy tale kind of look and stuff. Yeah, and as you say, every single one of these things has art
associated with the story. Yeah, it really makes reading the stories fun. We'll talk about more of that. But then look at these cards. Like, the game is modular. You build a scenario with cards. But these cards are in sets, like this black set here. But even within the set, there's different artwork on most of these cards according to they call these rumors, like gives you some clue about what this could be. But look at this, and they're like old-fashioned block print.
Yeah, like when you would cut out a stamp in arts class and just.
It's just very evocative. And normally I don't care about this stuff, but
the same thing with the backs of these. Yeah, they're the same kind of way where they have that woodcut look or whatever.
And but also, there's like art on each of these things. It's like a full. Look at this. Yeah. Every card has unique art according to its story. That's crazy, and each one of these is so beautiful.
Yeah. Do you mind if I'll see? Yeah. So there's a couple other things that I personally always like, and I talk about quite a bit if you've ever watched our reviews before. And that's the idea of bandwidth. And anything that cuts down and makes it easier for you to understand the game, and cuts down on you having to think like, oh, what's this rule or what's this thing? I really appreciate, because that allows you to spend more time on the game itself. And there's a few things, subtle things that are done in this game for that. Number one, like, I just like the fact that the sizes of the card here, like this size card goes in this space, this size card goes in that space. It's very easy to tell. Same thing here, this has a discard, this doesn't. They just come off the board, they're removed, which is kind of nice. And then, when this is here, you can see, you can't take this action. It has a little X, but it also shows you when this is here, so you don't have to move the card and say what is on this space again, because you can see clearly what's there.
And this gets back to what you were saying, like modern board game design. This is the kind of things that you expect when you get an experienced designer, an experienced company, that you don't see in sort of old games and in beginner design.
And then with
games.
these kind of things, the buildings and the towers here, you can see if you need these two to build it, and this is the benefit when you flip it over. And then when you flip it over, you know it's built. You don't care about what it costs to build it anymore, but you can see the benefits right there. Same thing here. So that's another thing that cuts down on you having to think about certain things. These tracks are nice and easy. They're just, that's a different color. You know that's where it starts. Nice and easy. You know when you get to the top, you get that benefit. You know when you get to the bottom, you lose the game. Very easy to see. And anybody playing the game can see at a glance with this tall, I mean, it could have been one of those little tiny cubes, but it's a nice tall piece there, which is great. We didn't even mention the fact that this board is lovely. It has all these little villages and things. You don't even care about that because you're so overwhelmed by all the other incredible things. Then, of course, there's these extra components, which we won't show because they're scenario specific, but they show on the back what scenario it goes to. That's for the opening scenario, and there might be a mix of those in the other games as well. So that's a very nice thing.
And how many games have we played where, like, this is our Defenders of the Realm reference, when, like, you look at the board, you can't tell where anything is. This has got such amazing art, but you can tell exactly. You can see all the iconography very clearly. It's just separated from the art in a way that it's not distracting, but it's beautiful.
And then this has this piece, so you know if this is there, that's where that goes. The only complaint I would say is that this green is a little green and green, so it would be nicer if it was maybe a blue. And then probably the best thing that's come out of modern board gaming in terms of, like, a component adjustment or whatever you want to say is this inset piece now, you know, which they always have. So, like, when you have the heart in there, you're not going to knock it and it's going to go over it. It's just going to go 1-1. And then, of course, here too, it has a little notch there to show you. That's an effect that happens, and we'll talk about that later. So it's easy to kind of see per player. So there's a lot of, like, you know.
Yeah, the components are just, you would call this overproduced, but usually use that term when it's as like a negative. But this one, like, it's all valuable. Like, it makes it more enjoyable. Just a tiniest bit of diversion, because you're talking about Kickstart. Like, this game came out of nowhere. I had never heard of it coming. I just stumbled across it at Gen Con. I don't know what the story is, but there's a tiny bit of a story, which is that Oltree, or however you pronounce this, was an RPG. That's where it comes from.
Oh, yeah? I didn't know
This is a board game based on RPG, I think 2013, 15, 16, somewhere in that range. So there is some, but not a well-known one, but that's the origin of this, and maybe that's where the inspiration for the stories are. But
I had no idea.
Setup of the game is, it felt like much quicker than you might think was such a big thing. The rule book lays out how to set up and play very well. And in general, I would say it's a good rule book. It explains everything. Anytime we had a question, it was in there. But I would fault the rule book in one sense. No player aids, no quick summary of turn, and lots of little sort of odd case consequences, like edge cases, that are scattered throughout the rule book that you really have to remember and sometimes struggle to find.
So I'll say that, like, for such a, we're overproduced game, like, incredible production, one double-sided player aid would have been like very nice to have.
And a little appendix. But you pointed out, someone on BGG will make those player aids that you'll be able to
wait
get.
a little bit and hope somebody else does that legwork. But that's really more of a nitpick.
Let me talk about basically how you set up a game that you're going to play, and then we can go and do our deep dive, which is going to be a deep dive into the details of this. But you start by picking which chronicle you want to play. There's 6 of them in the game. There's one short one, which is the intro one, and then the others are maybe a double-length game. You'll pick the deck of cards for the chronicle, and that tells a story. And then you'll pick an assignment, which sets a different initial setup and affects the difficulty, and will tell you which card sets to use.
Yeah. So essentially, like, whichever one of these you pick gives you a different set of goals to go for in that game. So you could use the same one every single time, or you could mix them up, and they get more and more difficult, of course, and they give you that little raven at the top. But the thing is, like, I mean, this and the missions themselves are different.
You mean the chronicle
itself,
story.
The scenario, however you want to say it. But then these sets of cards make a pretty big difference. You're always going to have the same difficulty with, like, those event deck and the problem deck or whatever, but this is going to change significantly the difficulty of the game, and then your goals, of course. And I think this is a bit of a double-edged thing because like it's always really cool to be able to dial that difficulty how you like. But sometimes I feel like so there's a game, it's a cooperative game, I think it's 221B Baker Street, I think it's called. It's a cooperative card game. It's actually very similar to Hanabi. It's sort of a riff on that. And there's like all these minute ways to make difficulty different. Mm-hmm. And there must be like, you could probably fine tune it and say, I'm going to do a difficulty of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 22, 28, 32. You know, there must be like 40 different difficulties in this thing. And to me, that's too much, you know? Mm-hmm. And in this game as well, they have, there's 10 of these different things and there's 6 different scenarios. So it kind of makes it like, I almost feel like that's too much with, it's like too much fine tuning.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, let me disagree. I mean, I agree with you. The point when you've got too many dials to adjust fine tuning, it backfires in a couple ways. One is you feel like I'm never beating the game. I'm just finding the difficulty. But here,
it's like a mini game of figuring out what difficulty.
But actually, there's only one dial in this game. It's which of these cards to play with. You pick one of these cards, and that's a medium difficulty. That's an easy difficulty, and that's hard. So this is the only dial, but. But what's interesting here is these change very little. They all involve securing certain locations, but little tweaks like you must build a tavern and a library in this one. In this one, you're building the dungeon and you're doing this. So what it does is it says you're going to play the game a little differently this time. You're going to have to try a slightly different strategy, and that's kind of cool. And they have a little story. So I don't feel like there's too many dials. I feel like. This is like when we play Orleans Invasion, we're like, let's try playing without the gear building. This is like forces you in a little direction to play a little differently.
Well, I think like for a game like this, and we're going to talk about the replayability and stuff in a moment, but like for a game like this kind of thing, Jesse and I often talk about consumability in games and how there's a lot of people that look at a consumable game as a bad thing, right? They think like if it's a legacy game or if it's a game you just play through once, they don't want that. Right. Even though, I mean, famously, in this interview I bring up all the time with Davio, he was like, people are never going to play it more than 10 times, but they don't want you to take that option away from them. And to us, like, I love that. I love like, hey, we played like 20 hours of this game. We're done with it. It was enjoyable. See you later. Time for the next game.
If you get 20 games of Pandemic Legacy, and then you're done. That's a wonderful feeling.
But in this game, like, and we'll talk about the replayability in a moment. But like, it's one of those things where you're like, you're not going to play all these combos necessarily. So it's kind of nice sometimes. In a game sometimes like a simpler way where it's like, okay, we're going to play against this monster on its normal side, or flip it over and you'll play the hard version. And that's a little more streamlined for me. And in a game where there's just so many like revolving things, like I think that would have been a point where I would have preferred a little more of that simplicity. But it is good to have an option. I guess we could play with the same one all the time. But I do see your point that it is interesting to give yourself a different set of goals.
Yeah, and it's a little. We haven't played this enough to know. Like, if you pick this assignment, right? You play with these 2 decks. And if you pick this assignment, you play with these 2 decks. We don't know enough about these decks to know how different they are in kind. Like, they're different little narrative stories, and some decks are harder than others, but it's not totally clear that like one deck is more about requires you to get better rewards and one deck. So, but maybe you would get used to them. The game does refer to these cards as having rumors, so like maybe you could intuit what was on the other side of the cards, but not. I didn't really find that to be the case in this game, right? When we turned over a card, we didn't know what we were gonna get.
Right. We played twice. The first scenario twice. We played it one time and then the second time, and like there were a number of cards that we drew, and I was like, I know exactly what that is. So it actually, you can.
But if you didn't know the card, we didn't know. Sure. On any given card, we're like, is this going to be a terrible thing?
Because we're kind of edging around this. Let's just talk about the replayability thing.
Okay, good.
Like, going into it.
Because this is kind of a big point for this game.
So, and let's step back for a moment too, because just in terms of like the overview of this thing, like I felt like when Jesse was looking at this, I looked at this. He had it set up. I got here, which is very nice, by the way. Thank you. That's like a good friend thing to do. Is like have the game kind of set up.
Learning the rules ahead of time. That's what the friend does.
So, but you like. I thought, whoa, and he started explaining things, and I'm like, there's so, and I said, I hope this is the kind of game that seems insanely complicated when you're looking at it, but then once you start playing, it's exceedingly simple. And would you say that's the case?
That's absolutely the case, yes.
Which is very nice.
Yeah, it was a real...
Yeah.
I mean, we started this video by saying a game where we were surprised by everything, but I really feel that was true. Like, every part of this game was like, wow, that's a pleasant surprise.
So, in effect, like we were playing, so I'm going to relate our experience without giving a spoiler. So we're playing through the first scenario, and we died.
Yeah.
And, you know, I thought like, this is not, you know, it is a story. You do the little story in the Chronicle. You're getting through that story, but it's sort of like playing something like Arkham Horror, the card game, or Lord of the Rings, a scenario where it's like you play it through the first time, and whatever happens is a complete surprise. And that's great, and it's fun. And then you're going to play it again to try to beat it or win. So it's much closer to something like Paleo. We have a lot of playthroughs on the channel. Paleo. Time Stories is set up that way where you have to play through many times.
Time Stories is really all about that.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of games that are kind of like that where it sort of wants you
Legends
to play
of Andor.
That's the other one I have written down. I looked at, where you get that same story. This seems very close to that game in many ways that we'll talk about.
I mean, what you're talking about now, this issue you raised, is for me like the heart of what's interesting about this game and the interesting thing to talk about. Because when we played it, I'm used to, like, there's a real narrative element to this game, right? There's this story, and the story doesn't change. When you play this Chronicle, it's exactly that story in exactly that order with very little, no randomness here, which is bizarre. So it's kind of like, can you play this multiple times? Are you meant to keep playing this story multiple times? But one of the things that surprised me about this game is that it's almost like you get two games out of this. Like the first time you're playing, it's the fun of the surprise. Like the story and those pictures are fun to play and experience as novel surprises. And you're sort of relying on your intuition. Like, should we do this? Should we do this? You don't know. You are given a little foreshadowing. You're told, like, the more assignments you can complete, the easier the end of this story is going to be. And that's like, gets you thinking. But then we played it once and we lost. And see if this matches what you thought. When we played it and we lost, I think we both were like, there's too much randomness in this game. Was this just randomness that we lost, or would we do better? Which is a similar thing that we've experienced with Paleo. And Paleo does it, and this game does it. When we played it again, I thought we were going to have a cakewalk. Now, I was wrong. But we used our understanding of the first game, and we squeaked out a win, and it felt very satisfying. Like we learned from our mistakes and how to beat this game. And that was, both games were fun.
Yeah. So that initial game, it is pretty interesting the way it goes, because like, you know, we had recently, like Endangered, we're talking about, like where it's sort of like you have to figure out which goals you're going for. And this Fate of the Nostromo, which we did recently, you know, you have those initial few goals, which are always going to be different. And then when you complete them, you find out what the final goal is. And it's hard to prepare for that. So this game kind of does that in the first time you play it, because you realize, oh, well, we're not going to win this. We knew instantly once we saw what we were supposed to do, we're like, there's no way to win it. Literally impossible to win. And then we realize, okay, the next time we do this, we have to do things differently. So it kind of has, you know, as you say, it was really kind of cool to say, you know, the first time to get that story thing, which is something that you quite enjoy.
Yeah.
You're really big on.
Yeah.
The second time through, one of the neat things about it is, you know, we played Flashpoint. You know, when we play Flashpoint, one of the most exciting parts of that game is in Orleans Invasion as well. We'll spend like 15 minutes before we play the game discussing what our strategy will be. I'll take these characters, you'll take those characters, we'll do this, and this is going to be our strategy to play this game, right? And you kind of, you're making like, it's like a turn zero where you're kind of before the game starts, like you're deck building at a Magic, you know, whatever. You're doing that stuff to figure out, and you're thinking, I'm going to take this character because this is going to be our goal. We're going to do this in this way, build these buildings for this particular purpose. And that makes a big difference. And it makes it turns the game almost completely different, which is really...
It's a puzzle. It's like solving a puzzle. And that's part of what we enjoy so much about these games. Now, the thing that's so hard to get right in a design is what this game gets right, and Legends of Andor almost gets it right. But what's so hard is, like, you play through it once, you want to feel like you're having fun, But once you see what's happening, it has to be the case that when you play it again, it's not easy. And that's hard to get that balance right. And that's where I feared this game was going to fall. I felt like now that we know exactly what to plan for, it's going to be a cakewalk. Yeah. But it wasn't. It still required us to really do our planning. And that was the most satisfying part. Both times, we played 4 games. In both games, we lost the first time and we won the second time. And both times close.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the negatives to it, though, is that like we played a long game for the second game and we died without seeing the full story.
That's a positive, though.
Right.
That's a real positive.
But the thing is, like, you could see where, like, if you did that and then you went through it again and then you saw some of the stuff at the end and you're like, oh, well, that's what we should have done, and you had to kind of go back again, that might have you a bit of a, like, slog.
And on a related note, like, we hit a couple cards that would have been an instant loss.
Talk about
that would have been bitter pill.
In a bit for the randomness and stuff. But, you know, this, like, having that, you know, definitely, like, this is definitely one where it's like you play it and then you got to play that one right again, because it's just like a time stories thing or something where, like, you got to remember what you're supposed to do. And
you could see people getting frustrated, like the first like. It's hard to win the first time. You don't know what's coming on. Although it's kind of fun to sort of try to guess. But you could see some people being like, this is unfair. You've given me a game that I can't win the first time through. But given what you said, given that you only see the story up until you lose, makes it fun to like... Well, Paleo has a little bit of that too, where you're like, we didn't see all those secrets. But this one even better. Like this one's like, we lost when we saw half the story. I was excited to see how that story developed.
Yeah. I mean, I think like that's, you know, it's... Probably, arguably, for me, one of the greatest parts of gaming is when of gaming cooperatively, is you lose the game and then you say, all right, let's go again. Let's do this, and everybody's got like, okay, we got to do, you know, and you're excited because you're like problem solving before the game even starts, and you're having that fun. Yeah. So I think that, and this game definitely has that because of that point, right? Because you don't know where that story is going to go. But you know, but you have to play that in sort of like fairly quickly. But yes, it is very similar to a lot of those other games.
Yeah. And
sorry.
Tiny bit last point. One of the nice things about knowing what's happening in the story is, like, I like games where, like, the tactical decision making turn by turn is fun, but the real enjoyment comes from when you're trying to plan for a move that's far away. And you're actually one of the reasons it's fun to play with you is you are very good at sort of tweaking out that stuff so that you know in 5 turns we have to do this and we better start on it now. And the fact that you know some things that are coming that are 6 turns away, that's very enjoyable to have to plan for that stuff.
Yeah, there's a couple moments where we felt like we were like, wait, if we do this now, we realized how to head off some other problems, which was pretty cool. And I'm just being vague, of course, but it was like, we're like, wait a minute, if we do this, then we can, but it is set up so that you can't really.
There are a lot of moving parts, a lot of plates to keep spinning, and you're always trading off.
Yeah, so short term versus long term, so that's kind of covers that. So do you want to talk about the role of luck and stuff in the game?
Yeah, let's get into some of these mechanics. So would you say that this was your biggest area of maybe weakness of this game? Like there are a lot of points of luck in here, and a lot of little randomness.
Yeah, so I often talk about like kind of points, and I usually use Pandemic as our reference point, where it's like Pandemic has, you know, whatever you do on your turn, you're doing, right? So the randomness is what cards you draw off the deck and what cards you draw off the villain enemy deck, the Pandemic deck or the disease deck or whatever. So those are 2 points of luck. Everything else is, and that's kind of why you need some sense of luck. Otherwise, it's completely deterministic.
And you have a pretty good statistical understanding of the likelihood of what's going to be in those 2 decks, even more as the game goes on.
So this game has a lot of randomness. This is just a lot of randomness. So you have random events. Yep. You've got random problems that can come out. They're going to randomly go in specific
different
locations,
places,
which will lock up things, so you can't predict that. There's going to be random events. You're going to roll dice randomly to decide if you succeed or fail at the events, and they are randomly going to be good for you or bad for you. There's going to be random...
Often you'll be making choices that you don't know what the consequences are. Someone will read the card and you'll have to make a guess.
So, and then probably the most maddening part of it is that the way that this goes through is you have a certain amount of turns before the game is over. And it's not so clear because, like, if you roll, where's that die, please? This one. If you roll a single thing, you move a single space. If you do two, you've really lost a chunk of time.
And of course, there's the other one that stays on the
stops
same space.
it.
So it balances out, but
It does balance out. But the thing is, like, if you roll a double here, it only stops at the Chronicles. So it does kind of force you to like always go through the Chronicle step. But that can be, like, especially in that intro game we played, like, I felt like I'm like,
you could get bad luck and the game would cut short dramatically and you have no chance.
Yeah, I mean, any kind of game you look at, like a cooperative game. Now, we just looked at one recently that didn't have that hard clock, and that was our clock to end. That was our big complaint about it. It lost that tension.
Than the Nostromo.
But in this game, it is a bit frustrating because you're thinking to yourself, you know, I mean, whether you have one turn or two turns to defeat the enemy or 3 turns, that's a pretty big deal. You know, like especially when it says, like, hey, if it's like sort of like a clock countdown where it's like, all right, now the bomb is set. You have either 4, 3, or 2 turns to get out. We don't know.
Yeah,
and that's a little crazy.
Yeah, I agree. Well, crazy is a good term because you're sitting there and you're thinking, was this necessary to do?
Yeah.
Like, did it really have to be? Did we really need an extra point of randomness? Like, but on the other hand, like, some of our good grind to halt have debate was like, well, there's a 1 in 6 chance it can hit this. It could stay in the same space. But if it does, it will kill us. So should we go through this whole trouble to avoid this 1 out of 6 chance? Like, it did. It's like crazy like a fox in a way. Like, I mean, I agree with you. My intuition is all like there's too many points of randomness. But on the other hand, like, it created some interesting decisions where we were balancing the luck. And these things created another one of these points where we played differently, where I'm like, I want to rest and get the stuff that would let me mitigate these. And you're like, you don't feel like that's an efficient way. So, like, all of these places of luck felt mostly like they worked and they were worth it. Now, the one part that sort of goes against that to me is all the randomness of these cards. And some of these cards, most of the cards, in all fairness, were minimal.
Let's take them in turn. So these cards, which kind of comprise like the story part of it, right? A large part of the story part of it that you have to go through in order to complete your end goals, right? So these really remind me of Arkham Horror, like 2nd edition, where, you know, you always have that encounter or whatever you're doing. And those always seem like they were completely randomized events that really held no cohesion. And that's one thing I think in Eldritch Horror they did well, was to, like, make it more of that singular story, single story or whatever. But those just always felt like, to me, from my memory, and it's been a long time, was like, all right, let's see how much I'm going to get beat up now. And these is kind of a neat idea because some of them give you some good benefits and some of them take some stuff away, you know? And some of them, if you fail, it's bad. Some of them, if you fail, doesn't matter. Some of them you can just say, I'm just going to avoid that.
Sometimes you're just given a choice. Do you want to do this or this?
Yeah. And sometimes it says, hey, you want to do this skill or that skill? And you say, well, I'm better at this skill. So they aren't like soul crushing, you know?
No, they definitely aren't. They feel very mild. Whether they're bonuses or detriments, they're pretty mild.
Yeah. But it is nice to have, like, cards that sort of give and take, you know what I mean? Not just like, you know what I mean, where it's like, I'm gonna have this adventure.
Yes, absolutely true.
And we didn't talk too much about theme before, but I do like this, like, it's like a Dungeons and Dragons world, you know? It's full of will-o-wisps, manticores, dragons, bugbears. I mean, they're all those standard Dungeons and Dragons monsters, which is pretty cool, I think. I think it's kind of neat when you're like, oh, there's a manticore, there's a wyvern, you know? Not just standard, I mean, you even had to be like, hey, what's the you got to be reminded what a manticore is. It's just pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We normally do spend a little more time on theme, but, like, it is a fun world. And as you were saying, like, you play Arkham, it's, like, all oppressive. This is, like, most of the stuff was very mild and kind of fun. Like, you meet a person who's a little bit of a character. I don't want to say any of the spoilers, but some of the stories are funny, but most of them are fun and enjoyable. Like, you feel good when you do something good, and when something bad happens, it's not devastating.
And it is kind of a nice thing, so that if you've played it a bunch, you know, you can look at that and say, okay, I kind of remember what that is. I want to avoid that, or I want to do it, or whatever. But it is maybe it's just like sort of a little bit of a trick where you feel like you have more of a choice in it, but it's cool that it shows you the picture.
Yeah.
You know, and you think like, oh, I don't think that like, it's not the kind of like this top one is called a band of mercenaries. I mean, you might think like, oh, I'm the fighter, I'll go do that, you do the other thing, but there's no way. Moving around the board takes so long. You would never, the action economy is so important that like you cannot do that. But it is kind of a nice little thing to just kind of see what's coming.
And remember, you're replaying with those decks. So if you kept playing Band of Mercenaries, if you kept playing with that deck, you might realize that those cards are a little dangerous.
And then these problems which come out and they cover these up, they're always the same thing. They're always tests, you know. They can be a little bit random and annoying if like, you know,
there are certain combinations. If a certain card goes in a certain space, it's very difficult.
You're like,
to get
hey,
rid
you
of.
need a fur to do this, but it's sitting on the first spot, and you're like, I guess we can never do that. You can never. I mean, there is a very long-winded way around it, but you know, that can be frustrating.
Now, here's another good example of what you talked about modern board game design. Like, there are tests. Like when we play Arkham Horror, we would frequently get into a case like, there's no way I'm ever going to beat that. Right, the card game. There's no way I'm ever going to beat that. This is horrible. This is ridiculous. These cards, they've got two little spots. If you get one success, you make some progress on it. Like nothing is going to stop unless you get some really bad combination. It's all just slows you down a little, which in this game, since everything is so tight, a little bit of slowdown hurts you, but it feels enjoyable. Half the cards are face up. You know exactly what you're walking into. And the ones that are face down always resolve and go away.
Yeah, well, these problems come out. You can see right what they're on. You can look and say, all right, I'm good at this. I'll make my way over there and do this other thing. So it's kind of nice. These events, however, that's the kind of it feels like take that. Sometimes
that's
they come
the weakest part of the game.
The weakest part of the game for sure. They come out and you're like, oh, our prestige is high. Doesn't affect us. Oh, our prestige is a little lower. We just started the game. We get hit hard.
And quite a few of those events are like, that would be the worst thing that could happen. If we got unlucky, we would be losing.
Like there's one of them like that I'm not going to say too much, just like it says you basically can't move. And if you're at the end of the game and you have that 2-round window, like it says, here's the bad guy. You got to fight him now type thing. And it's like, I can't move from here. So you could see you've been playing 2 hours, you draw that card, and you're like, you want to flip this table over.
Yeah.
So I think really feels... Yeah.
We're both agreement. Like, you could have figured a way to not have those event cards in this game. I think you might have a better
They're
game.
thematic. I'll give you that. They do things...
And they've got beautiful art on them.
Yeah. And they'll...
Some of them are persistent. But boy, if you were playing a 4-player game and got that negative persistent thing that didn't let you go somewhere, that would feel better.
There's some... Again, like... Oh, that one didn't affect us at all. This one just completely destroys us, kills the next 2 turns for me or whatever. I don't know. Like, it's just, it can be really punishing. And again, we don't like those event cards in games mostly.
That's true, we don't. And let me, just to beat a horse a little bit more. We talked about, I don't know if we talked about it on camera, but in Captain is Dead, there's like a stack, but it's small enough that you're like, oh, now I get it. I'm always going to see all of these, and I have to plan for this. That deck is big enough that you're not going to have... That's not going to be a useful strategy. You're not going to see most of them. But it's the same deck every game, so you are going to be seeing those narrative parts. So I think you're going to get sick of the narrative and the randomness and killer. So like that's the rare miss on this game.
I had wrote down Captain is Dead because it did make me think of that, where you're like, because you are replaying this over and over again, as we said, right? And Captain is Dead, when we first played it, I'm like, this is ridiculous. You're just playing this completely randomized thing. But no, it's the same thing every time. So you're thinking like...
Just in a different order.
In a different order. And you're thinking like, well, that's going to come out at some point. So let's be prepared for it, or let's wait till that comes out, which is pretty cool.
Right. But
this one, you're never going to see them all.
The deck is too large.
It's too large per game. But you are going to see a lot of the same things over and over again. But it's just like, like... For instance, like if you either of these tracks go to 0, you lose. And if something happens and this gets low and you draw an event and it says lower that 1, you're like, oh, well, we just lost. And it really sucks to have a card turnover and say you lost. And you could make an argument and say, well, you should keep your levels up and stuff. But, maybe something happened and you got knocked down and you weren't able to put that right back up. And then the card comes out and says lose the game, basically. Yeah. It's not a good feeling after playing a game.
And not necessary.
Not necessary. I mean, if there was some way to like say, you can avoid anything by spending a heart, one of your hearts on the thing. We'll talk about that in a moment. Or
do the thing that you've suggested before in event-like games. Like if you had a schedule and you knew in 3 turns this is going to happen, then you could plan to avoid it. Yeah. I almost feel like that could be a house rule for almost any game with event cards.
That's really good, Jesse.
Like a general house rule for any game with event cards is schedule them.
And it's not like most of them don't say just like, hey, if you have a bread, lose a bread. And if you don't, whatever. Most of them are like, if you don't have the bread, lose this. But, you know, like you're always going to get hit with some kind of negative. And, you know, I mean, that's might be too much information doing what you say, but like generally we don't like that sort of take that thing in the game. It's a feel bad moment.
Should we segue a little bit into the nature of cooperation in this game?
Well, let's first talk about this part of it, I think, which is cool, is the fact that, like, for this part of randomness, right, you got a 50% chance on each die, but I like the fact that you have this choice to spend a heart and get a success out of this, because your hearts are valuable, you know, and that's an economy, you know, you can't just turn every single one of them over, but sometimes you're like, is it worth a heart to turn this into a success? Which is pretty cool, I think.
Well, there's these dice that you roll when you do tests. You've got lots of little dials for you. First, you can build buildings that would let you roll more dice. And different players roll a different number of dice in certain skills. So there's decisions about who should go into a test. And then, as you say, it's pretty hard to roll a success. But two of them are successes. This one, as you say, you pay a heart. And it's a little weird that almost every character, the moment you lose a single heart, you lose your special ability. So that's a tough decision. And then the whole bread thing, which is a reroll. And you have to rest to get these breads. I mean, that's an interesting. That was a huge decision point in our games, when to rest.
Yeah. So I think like that's kind of cool because it's another choice you can make. Is it worth it to spend these hearts? However, one of the things that we really like about games is having variable player powers. And this game has like 10 or 8 different characters. There's a lot of different characters you can pick from. And most of them, the second you lose one heart, whether it's from an event saying lose a heart, or whether it's from having to spend one for a success, you lose what makes your character special. You don't have a power anymore.
Yeah,
it is an interesting situation because I haven't seen that in a game before. It's amazing that nobody's thought before to say like, hey, you can spend some of your life to succeed, but if you do, you're going to lose your special power.
I can't think of any game either.
So it is a neat idea, concept, but like, you know, like.
But there's two. Can I?
Yeah.
So one of the problems with that is like that's almost the death of you if you don't have your special power. So it's almost like the moment you fall below here, you know that you have to rest to recover it. But the other thing that makes that even more painful is that like these special powers are not that great. It doesn't, like, we both like games when the players are very asymmetric. And wouldn't you agree that in this game?
So I think that like in a game like Captain is Dead, as we mentioned, your character completely changes the puzzle of that game.
Absolutely.
If you're like, okay, we played these two, throw them out. Let's try these two. The
totally different game.
Completely different. You play Pandemic.
Totally different
game. You're like, okay, well, this game, I'm going to do this thing, you're going to do that thing, and it's going to be a completely different thing. Same thing with Flashpoint. Many of these games, you're like coming to it fresh. This is like you have a slight advantage or difference. You're not changing. And you know, that's actually pretty similar with Atlantis Rising as well. Like it kind of felt like I'm like, well, why do I want it? You know, and that's something that I think that was a little bit of a miss.
That's definitely a miss.
Now,
also, just to add on top of that, some of these powers seem very weak compared to others. Like, you got 8, but really you got 4.
or less.
Or less, so.
I mean, you can see it's kind of cool that you can take a different kind of character that has a different, you know, each of you will say, okay, I'll take Traveler, I'll take the Scholar, I'll take the Fighter, whatever. That way you have extra dice for whatever tests or whatever. But ultimately, like, you know, most of the characters are the same, which is a bummer. But I do think, like, if you're a game designer, you're a budding game designer or whatever, like, this is a really neat idea. Having a few life points to spend to change dice, and if you get too low, you lose your power.
You lose your special power, yes.
But it does force you to take the more of those rest actions, which is cool as well, right? That balance or whatever. But, you know, for me, like, I think most of the characters lose 1 point and they lose their power. So I think that maybe allowing you to get a couple life points down, especially since there's cards in the deck that are basically like, you know, that's it. Yeah. And when you take a rest action, you don't have there's very few actions in this game. And that's the other thing too about scalability, just a real quick thing. You know, this game does not change at all. It's just that each of you takes less turns.
Yes, that's right.
So you can see if you were playing this game and you're like, oh, cool. Oh, I have to rest 3 times. What if that's like 10% of the 20% of the things you do in the game in a 4-player game? It's a bit,
That's it. It is. We should say we play most of these games we talk about only 2 players, so it's a little hard.
For 2.
So it's a little hard for us, but sometimes we can make some guess. Like, what was the game we played? That was the Mysterium Park. We were like, this will play better at 4.
Yeah.
This game feels like it wouldn't play better at multiple people for one reason.
I would say that, like, if you're playing 4-player, you could have people in different regions, which you wouldn't have to move as much. Maybe that makes it a little easier because you'll have somebody over there to collect that resource or whatever. So there's that. But also, the turns are quite quick.
That is true.
And
the turns are
that's
quick.
one nice thing.
That's a good point. The turns are quick. But if you had 4 players, there'd be a new chronicle every turn. That's just weird.
No, it's the same because you go through the same amount of rolls. So it's the
same.
That's
what I mean. Like, by the time it got back around to your turn, it'd be a new chronicle would come out.
True.
The other thing I noticed when playing this game, and I don't know what slot to put this in, but there were a lot of times where I felt like, well, this is my job. I have to go there and do that. We've talked about this with a couple of games we've played. That doesn't bother you so much, but it itches away at me. Like, I want to have more freedom to do stuff, but I can see that I should be doing this because that's what I'm good at. Like, sometimes it happens in Pandemic. Like, my job, I got to go clean up this stuff. But in this game, it felt a little more like there were a significant number of turns where I was like, well, this is what I got to do. And I would have liked to have a little more choices.
Well, it does pigeonhole you a little. I mean, not so bad. Like, we talked about Flashpoint before, where it was like, if you're the guy in the fire truck spraying the hose, that's all you can do.
Yeah.
Spray the hose. Because, like, it takes so many actions to move it. And, like, you're on the truck. You're not going in the building. And to me, I'm like, that's completely boring unless you do 2 characters each. Which, in this game, no way. Yeah. So that's going to be a discussion Jesse and I'll have on camera at some point, where we talk about, like, double fisting, as they say, where you play 2 characters at once and, that sort of thing. But this game is not
mention that,
happening.
like, there's a weird thing in this game about how you advance the enemy's action before yours, which is not how most games work. Most games, you take your action. Like, that is hard to remember. You got to have a Greg with you who's pretty good at remembering whose turn it is, because it's hard sometimes.
Well, this game definitely helps to divvy up the tasks, like I always roll... I roll. This is kind of a hack. Not a hack really, but I always roll those 2 at once. I don't care if I use that, but if the card says to use the black die, I've already rolled it. I don't have to roll it again. I know that seems silly, but every little bit does the thing. And then Jesse always rolls these dice. I know people like to roll their own dice, and that's fun for them. So that's probably people are mortified by that. But I just let Jesse roll all those, and that kind of helps keep the game flowing a little easier for us personally. So yeah, I mean, I didn't see that as much about the pigeonholing. I did feel like kind of excited that, like, oh, I'll go and it's more efficient for me to build. You were playing the double action in the last game we played, and it seemed like there was, but that was sort of a strategy that we had made.
Just a minor. It's not a deal breaker for me.
So overall in the game, though, I kind of felt like when we first played it, the first game we played, I kind of felt like, I'm like, well, I'm just drifting through this game. I mean, it just felt like it doesn't really matter. Like, we'll resolve these. Maybe they'll be good. Maybe they'll be bad. Maybe that's the best action. Nobody really knows because there's just so much of that randomness. On the second play, as we kind of talked about, where you realize you have to do certain things, I still had that sense in me, but I knew that, like, it's almost like poker, where, like, it's like, well, hey, if you fold your 3-7, that's the best move. But if you didn't, maybe you hit a full house when there was 7-7-3 in the flop, and that was the 1 out of 2,000 times that would happen. But for the most part, you kind of figure out, like, there is a deeper strategy. So I think it's kind of, the game is operating at 2 levels. You play a 4-player game, and you got some people that, like, they just want to be beer and pretzels. They want a little more casual. The turns are fast, and you're just like, I'll go and take care of this. Who cares?
And there would be narrative on every turn, so they could have the fun of it.
But on the subsequent plays, you can say, like, we got to do this, we got to do this, and you're going to really batten down and say we have to do those things. It becomes highly strategic, which is really surprising, as you said in the intro of this video, is that, like, there's just these 2 completely different games, weights happening at the same time. Yeah,
let me talk about that a little bit. Like, when we played the first time, I was like, there's too much luck in this game that could go either way. But the fact that we just squeaked out our second game, our victory, like it does appear as a different game. It's a very tight optimization puzzle, and you are good at those games. I'm not quite as good because I don't, but I love that. I love that nature. There's a real engine building going on about which buildings to build in which order and how to bulk up and when to pull that timing trigger. And I love that decision in games. And that long-term planning in this game is really there. A lot of our discussions were like, in what order to do things so that we get strong enough to do the other things and get them done before the end of the game, which is creeping up on you. We talk about pace. And that is so satisfying. It's such a tight little optimization thing where like one little extra die, in the beginning you're like, let's just try to solve those things, but I'm only rolling 2 dice. Let's spend some little effort building up
or
here.
just
That
moving,
is so,
just saying I'm going to stay here and do this thing. So
moving is so expensive, as you point
So
out,
expensive.
that's a fun puzzle. That's like, I cannot afford, like those arguments we have about like, is this the
And
more
their
efficient
arguments.
move or is this the more efficient move? I think we both enjoy that moment in the games where we're debating, and sometimes we convince each other, okay, I can see. And this is another one of those games, like, I think maybe Endangered was like this too, that I love, where you're like, well, this is the most efficient action to get this. But we've also got 3 other things we're trying to take care of. We're trying to make sure we don't lose from this, get this, and do this. So you're like trying to figure out, like, if I turn this dial here, I move this one a little bit, this one goes up a little bit, this one goes up a little bit, and I've stayed up. And those, weighing those values of those different gains and risks is so enjoyable.
So we played a game recently, and I cannot remember what it was, but I remember there was one rule that made the game. Like it made the it completely changed the game. And if that one rule was different, the game would be insanely easy. It would be totally different. And it's interesting how like there's something that completely constrains the way that you play the game. And this game, you cannot do the same action twice in a row.
Yeah,
which changes everything. Because
it does change everything.
like you'll be here and you'll say, well, I want to do this, get 2 rock. Well, you can only do 1. What are you going to do for your second action? I guess I'll move. Well, then does that set me up for the next round? It means that you have to keep doing the suboptimal play all the time.
Yes, that's right.
And so your suboptimal play now becomes, what's the most optimal suboptimal play?
Yeah.
Which is
and
crazy.
It does completely change the way. That's a really interesting point. It's definitely not the first game that's done this. A bunch of games use that same rule. You can't do the same thing twice. And it is like one of those, like the bang for the buck for that rule, in terms of making you do much more diversified, interesting things, is quite large. It's a great.
I really want to know what game that was.
Bloop, it'll be
Yeah.
great. We'll think of it later. But that's a great point. That's a lot of mileage comes out of that one rule, making you have to come up with better strategies.
Yeah, because you'll be like, well, I mean, I want to move here and then move here so I can do that next round. And then you're like, well, I can't because I can't move twice. So if I move here, I don't have any action in the fortress because we can't build anything. Okay, well, should I do this and this instead? Like, you're always, anytime you're going to move, and I'm always thinking like, because of that, you're always setting up your next turn. You're like, okay, if I stay here and I do this and this, well then, what's my next turn? I could do this turn and move here, so that next turn I can do this action and then move here and do this. And that becomes the heart of the puzzle. Is like, not how to just do well at the game, but how to like make it so that you link those actions up.
And part of what makes that so satisfying is that the game, the randomness and the state change of the game every turn is random enough that you can't completely predict it, but it's controllable enough that you have a pretty good idea, right? Like, the worst thing that's going to happen is one more card's going to come out here. Like, so you can do long-term planning, but you have to do the tactical adjustments.
Yeah. So and there's no mistake. There's like 3 cards here, which means that like if you want to clear this out to secure it, which you have to do a number of times around the board, like, well, you're going to do this 3 turns, which is an eternity. But if someone comes to join you, maybe they can get one, and then you can get one, and then they can move out. And that becomes the heart of every single decision you make, which is like, how do you set up the next 3 turns?
But also, this is a perfect example of the other thing that we enjoy in these games, where you're like, you make progress on one goal, and then the situation changes and you get some risks out on the board, and you have that hard discussion where you're like, we've already gone down this path. We should stick on it. And the other person's like, we have to divert. We have to change our plan based on the changing context. And that's very satisfying. But would this be a good time to segue into the nature of the cooperation? Because I think maybe that's another little area. Small.
So, sure.
We talk about cooperative games and what's the nature of the way we cooperate. And maybe another one of the small misses of this game.
Don't cooperate so well in this game.
Is that there's no explicit cooperation. You're sharing the resources. So most of what you're doing is dividing tasks. You're saying, you go do this, I'll go do this. I can benefit from your resource. But it's a little weird that you can't team up to do some of these things. It feels like if you teamed up, you could both roll your dice.
Yeah, what's weird is like I had mentioned this. I'm like, it's weird that when we're in the same space, it doesn't do. Most of the time you feel like there's some extra benefit of being in the same space. Like Legends of Andor has that. Where you're like you get some. You're like teaming up.
I sure hope I haven't missed the rule that says if you're in the same space, you roll both dice.
You go black and white.
Looking at the rule book. Yeah, that's the black and white.
You slow it all down. Yeah, I mean that's a little strange. So that part of it, this I don't know about what it is about this game, but you and I have completely different ideas of what we're trying to do. When we play it, the very I say famously between the two of us, and Endangered, I hate drafted something. This is so funny to me.
The worst part about that is once it worked.
Yeah, I
now start to think about doing it in the future.
So that Jesse couldn't take it because I wanted him to take some other move. And in this game, I actually apologized to him after we played the playthrough that is on camera or whatever, because it really felt like it was like I felt like we really got fairly heated, and I had a long day at work. I don't mean to make an excuse for myself, but I felt like kind of bad that I was. That we really we were pretty argumentative, and so
I don't think it was that.
But in any case, we definitely had two completely different ideas of what we should be doing in this game, which I guess is a mark on the good column, and probably the truth lies somewhere in the middle, maybe closer to my side. But
But more importantly, we also had moments where we convinced each other of a better move and stuff,
which is a mark of a good game as well.
And I don't know, I don't know if this is a point, but I was thinking after we played this that. It's nice, both of us don't worry about the alpha gamer problem. And I've seen recent reviews that are like, this game suffers from alpha gamer. No, not this game, but writing a review of a game, and they're like, designers should know by now not to allow that in a game. We do not agree with that. Do not fix your game by making it hidden information so people can't work out a plan. That is not a fix. We like this. But also in this game,
I want to address that point for a second.
Okay.
So when we played, one of our big complaints with Wonder Woman was that you can't really plan your turn. You kind of make a plan. You're like, I guess I'm going to do this, and you talk about it, and then you get the rest of your cards is half the rest of your hand. You're like, oh well, I can't now tell you that that's a completely awful plan. So you're going to go off and do the wrong thing, and I can't even join you. It's terrible. It's like a terrible fix. I mean, if you're going to cooperate in a game, it's basically in it. Are you going to cooperate? Well, then play. And you want to play a cooperative game? Then do it. It's sort of crazy. It's like it's a ski strip, but you don't do any skiing, and it doesn't make any sense to me. It's
there are different people. Some people obviously like it. A lot of games have it. Spirit Island. There are lots of games that are purposely designed to stop that, and some people have it. And I can see, depending on who you're playing with, wanting that. If you're playing with someone that you don't want to have this detailed lockstep cooperation, it might be nice, but we don't like it. But in this game, maybe all cooperative games, I can't remember, but. In the end, you can say, well, it is my character. If you play this war of mine, you are making joint decisions, and they're joint decisions. It is kind of nice in this game. I like that. In this game, it is kind of nice that you still have your guy or your girl. And you can say at the end, like I did occasionally, this is what I'm doing. In the end, you do have some autonomy. And sometimes you have to use it and
you did say that. I know everything is I'm going to use my autonomy.
I'm going to rest. Yeah. So, but a little bit of a miss there, I think. It felt like a little bit.
So, that reminded me of something, and it just...
Well, let me jump in then. Here's a topic that we talk about in some of our very favorite. If I think about my very, very favorite games, like Orleans Invasion or something, or Pandemic... You can sort of say, let's try this strategy.
The name strategy, that's exactly what I was trying to think of. Yeah, no, I had just remembered it, and then you went on to it.
So this game, that's not really there, right?
I don't know about that. So, card game players like Magic the Gathering, some of the LCGs, even like Arkham Horror, Lord of the Rings, whenever you see some kind of thing happening in any of these games, really, you're like, how do I break this? Right? That's one of the first things I'm thinking is like,
As the
what can I
Kobayashi
do?
Maru Star Trek scenario.
The Kobayashi Maru, sir.
Are you asking me if we're playing out that scenario now?
On the test, sir. Will you tell me what you did? I would really like to know.
Lieutenant, you are looking at the only Starfleet cadet who ever beat the no-win scenario.
One of the things we did in this last game, and I could talk about this because it's not part of the scenario, it's part of the game rules, is like, we realized that if we move the castle track up, every time you do the castle track, after that, it just allows you to move a card on one of the incidents. And that's a really compelling way to not have to move all over the board, just to sit there and just mill away all the cards so that if there's a tower here, it automatically gets secured. And Jesse played Conrad, and the plan was for him to go and just kind of mill that thing away, the whole, like, a large chunk of the game, which was not as satisfying as you said before. But that's kind of a way to break the game a little bit, you know? I mean, again, something might come out there that would stop that space from being useful. We sort of tried to do the same thing with this prestige track, where if you move it up, you keep getting gold coins. And okay, well, we'll just keep doing stuff that does that and gaining gold coins. And then we'll go to this space, trade them all in for the exact resources we need to build the exact buildings we want to build. So that was a little bit of a cheatando thing that we did.
Well, not cheating, but yes, you are right. It was like a different strategy to play the game differently, and depending on the goals, you might play it differently. But it doesn't feel like there's that much room for different strategies. You're sort of squeaking out efficiency.
Like in the beginning, I think I was like, I had the idea. I said, okay, well, my character, it wasn't these colors, but like my character was good at building, like kind of free build action. So I said, Jesse, you go first. Go over, collect a resource. Then on my turn, I'll build for free and move and build, grab stuff up. So it was like just a little bit of a extra, and maybe enough of those little things. I think, would you agree? That's what's going to make the difference between winning and losing the game.
Oh, for sure. I'm just saying, like, when you take your character that's good at building, that's what you should be doing. Whereas when you play Orleans, you're like, let me try knight strategy this game. Yeah. Let me try farmers. It's not you have some more freedom of how to win the game.
I can't
this
believe
game
that's what you
doesn't
said.
feel what?
I thought for sure you'd say, let me try these gears. Jesse loves gears. Yeah. If I was editing this video, I'd have gears rain down like like confetti. He loves the gears strategy. That's the only
okay. Well, what should we talk about next?
Well, I was going to dovetail in perfectly that comment to like, we've said a lot of good things about this game, and there's a lot of interesting things going on in the game. But I did enjoy playing, but like, it's kind of like the whole picture makes it a good game or an enjoyable game. But I don't really feel like the satisfaction of like, I'm not like, I really felt good about moving here and doing this. You're limited in such a way, and it's such an efficiency engine of like just squeezing out a little bit of extra.
Absolutely.
That true. like I'm not thinking like, oh, I can't wait to play it again and do these things. Like,
yeah,
I don't feel.
I think that's right.
I don't feel a large.
Same thing with the buildings. There's no real excitement from building a building. You're like, this just is the tiniest little thing.
Oh, look, the barracks gives me one extra die for when I fight.
They're all the same.
Cares?
They all feel like little tweaks. I think that is
joy to build the barracks.
I think that is really true, and everything except the Chronicle story feels the same way. Like, it's a tiny little encounter that gets you one thing or lose one thing. They're all very minor. I think you said it well. Yeah. There isn't that juice of super excitement on any given turn.
And like, this game is so similar to Paleo to me. Like, there's so much similarity. I feel like
in feel, not in
in the feel of the game. Yeah, where it's like this sort of story, but then you kind of know the story and you can kind of affect it. But also in the way when you're playing, where it's like, here's 3 cards. What are we doing? That done. Like, and it sort of feels like it's playing itself in a way. And I know that's not what you're doing here, but I kind of feel like it's not the actual things you're doing in the game are not super exciting. It's not like, all right, I'm going to go over here and like form a good defense, and Jesse, you go around there and use your archer to shoot down in that area. It's not like that. You don't feel like that exciting sense.
I hear you. Okay.
You just sort of feel like, okay, you almost feel like you're drifting to the game in a way. You're making these efficiency decisions, but like, it doesn't feel like, I don't know, it doesn't feel satisfying, I guess, the actions you take. there's not a satisfying feeling. Where
No,
you're
I
like,
think you got a good point. I think you got a very reasonable point there. Now, whether those are still important, like we do agree, these are the optimization tweaking you're doing is important. They're just tiny little steps that they may not feel satisfying, but they are important. I think that's a good point. Can we talk a little
well, I
bit?
want to kind of stick with that just for a
Okay.
moment. So like in one game, you might think like, if you're playing like a Zombicide or something, you might think like, all right, I got the AK-47. I'm going to go out here and I'm going to mow down this like group. Then Jesse, you're going to run through that open space and you're going to go in that
Or a
room.
game we recently played, Fast and Furious, which had some exciting.
Yeah, that's a perfect example where, yeah, you're like, all right, I'll knock this car, hit it over here, and then you like ram it out of the way or whatever. And that's like, those are like satisfying things happening. Like, I'm going to kill these orcs with my battle axe, or like, I'll throw a bomb in there and just blow all these guys up.
Yep.
That's fun. And even something like Pandemic, where it's like, I'll clear this up, move here, clear those up, and those will be like good. And then like, yeah, and then we're gonna hit it hard on like curing this disease. I don't know. There's like a satisfaction.
It's a really interesting point. I mean, it's sort of like a pro and con, because one of the things we were talking about, which was good, is like the elements of luck, the random cards are all like not too hard to beat. But one of the consequences of that is everything you basically beat right away. It's nothing feels all that weighty.
Yeah.
Maybe with the exception of the Chronicle, because the Chronicle occasionally has like a big challenge or interesting thing. But I do agree with you. I think you've got
So
a
we
valid
played
point.
a game somewhat recently. I remember talking about this where I said like everything about the game seems good, like really good, very exciting, like or not exciting, but like well designed. Every point you look at, you're like check, A+, A+. But I said the game just lacked a spark.
Well, Alien Nostromo is that game you're talking about. Yes,
No,
it is.
Not
Yes, it
the
is.
last of spark. Lacked a spark.
Yes, it is.
Well, we did talk about the lack of the. No, there was another game I'm thinking.
You
about.
quoted lacks a spark with Alien Nostromo.
That was something else as well. Then.
It's going to be a bloop. Either I'm right. Vote now. Pause the video. You vote now. Who you think is going to be
Anyway.
right.
Or some rules that were a little fuzzy for such a simple game. But overall, I thought it was a pretty good implementation. Again, I think the biggest problem I have with the game, other than being too easy, is that it lacks that spark of like, just that thing you can't quite name. Again, I think the biggest problem I have with the game, other than being too easy, is that it lacks that spark. The game was great, but it lacked like a spark to make me really excited. And I feel like this game kind of like feels that way in the terms of what you're moving around. So, I don't know.
I mean,
it's a very
I
nebulous
think
thing
I
to discuss.
disagree, but I completely understand what you're saying and agree at the detail. But maybe get back to that when you make your final points. I think it's important to talk about pace a little bit in this game, because I think it succeeds there. And it's the nature of the threat of these hitting. Both of our games, maybe not both of our games, but one of our games, we were like doing great. And we were this is my favorite part about these cooperative games, where you're like, we're okay on that. We'll just let that threat go. Let's not divert ourselves to solve this. And then before you know it, the spaces are filled up. And all of a sudden, you're at a huge risk. And it has a little bit of feel of Bowser's Ghost Stories game, I know, where things are filling up. And as they fill up, your threat, your danger of something bad happening. And that works for me. That peril place where we're constantly having to decide how much energy we want to spend to reduce the peril, what's the chance of it hurting us, felt very satisfying. Like those decisions of when we have to switch course and keep ourselves from death, those were fun moments.
Yeah. Well, I think like in most of these games, like there's a clock or an arc going up. So in Pandemic, you're drawing 2 cards in the beginning, and by the end you're drawing 4 cards.
Pandemic
and
is the elite best.
Yeah, but that's what's bringing up the pacing and the stress. But you're also getting more powerful. So there's like this dual arc happening. Yeah. And Flashpoint, you're putting out more little hotspots, causing you to roll more and more and more until you're just going to lose. And so a lot of those games are making the enemy stronger. This game is actually pretty interesting from a game design standpoint because it's just as hard in the beginning as it is in the end. There's not gaining any strength, essentially. It's bringing out the same amount of stuff at any given point. But the difference is entirely the story. And this chronicle is what has all the pacing in it, or the stress in it, because you look at that, once you know the chronicle, you're like, all right, we have like just until this chronicle comes back to do the things that we're supposed to do on this chronicle. If we're going to win this game, we have to move quickly, and that's what changes everything, which is really, I've never seen that before in any game that I can think of, that the pacing and
Legends of Andor, maybe.
Well, maybe that's a whole other puzzle. Yeah, that's a little.
Well, can I jump in a little bit? Yeah, I think you're mostly right, and that's interesting. The only little asterisk I want to put in there are the peril things that are coming out, because they do build up. It's not fixed. You can cut them down, but over time, those perils do build up. If you don't, they will snowball.
But every round, one thing is coming out.
Yes.
You could respond to that one thing, or the one thing from last turn. So I'm just saying, like, it's not like in the beginning they're coming out at a different quantity as they're at the end.
Yes, so. You're right. Which is a little, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's pretty really
Ghost Stories, same thing, though. Ghost Stories, they're just coming out at the same rate. It's just that because you can't put out all the fires, the fire gets worse. And that happens a little bit with this game, but as you point out, you could kind of put out all the fires in this game, each peril. It's just you can't also keep up with the needs of the Chronicle. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So...
We're ready to move on, but on our list here, I see it says, were there memorable moments? Like, can you remember memorable moments from our playthroughs? Like, I remember some from the story, which were cool, which we can't talk about spoilers, but there were some fun moments in that story, right? When you say, like, you haven't talked about, I know I like these kinds of narrative stories, but you had fun with that story, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's kind of neat, and then it's kind of cool because in some of them, there's like multiple things going on. There's like bad things and good things, but like it's kind of cool. Like, I don't know, it's like, it's really kind of nice in a game to feel like, oh, there's some benefit. And of course, that's going to be offset by the difficulty. It's, if you're getting some benefit, you know they're going to, you know, sometimes they're like, you get to do this for free, or you get these extra things or whatever. And they're like, oh, that's really awesome. And then you're like, wait, why are you? It's like, it's like when you're playing a video game, you're like, cool, look at all these potions. Wait a second, you know, like, because you know that that's going to get more difficult. But it is kind of nice that you do get some reward and it's not all bad.
And you know what else is so good about those stories? Is they're never like, turn over and here's this completely new thing. There is foreshadowing. Like, you're turning over this card and you're like, you get a little taste, as you were saying, like, something's coming. Yeah. Then the next card that develops a little more. And then, like, so you have this anticipation and intuition about, like, we played a game, we were like, something's coming. Should we do this? Like, the game hasn't told us we need to do this. Yeah. But maybe we should do this in case, like, that
it's not just a linear story either. There were some twists that we did not expect. Yeah. Which is cool, I think, you know. So there was some very nice little moments in the story there. I mean, I think, certainly, I mean, we've talked about other games, like, to me, like, Legends of Andor has some really good qualities, but it's like, I mean, it takes forever to set up. It's got all this minutia, and like, sometimes they set up these scenarios that you could never win just from the get-go, and you're like, well, I guess I'll go back to the 2-hour setup, and it's so insane to look around the board and be like, where's this now? I mean, there's like a lot of little nitpicks. This seems like, if you like Legends of Andor, or if you wanted to like Legends of Andor, this is the game for you, because it's definitely, that's right. It almost feels like it's quite different in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways it's very similar, and it feels like I don't like the idea of when people say board gamers love doing that, like, this is an Agricola killer, this is like a Seven Wonders killer. They love that. I don't know what it is about it, but board gamers love that. But like, if I get the benefit of both things, because I'm going to say no. But if you, I mean, this is almost like an Andor killer in a way, you know. Yeah,
I think you said it right. If you wanted to like Andor, because you like the idea of a puzzle and narrative, like, this is it, without all the drawbacks of Legends of Andor, which there are significant ones. The setup time is painful in Legends of Andor. Yeah. The only reason you might, like, I have a soft spot in my heart for Legends of Andor. The only reason you might like Legends of Andor a little bit that this doesn't have is Legends of Andor felt a little bit like a hard puzzle to solve. Like, you play it once and you're like we had one mission in Legends of Andor, not to go down the rabbit hole, but we really had to spend a day figuring out how to solve it. And that doesn't have that. That's not flavor's not here.
I think, like, to bring it closer to this game, like, Legends of Andor is like, to me, is like, here's like a very strict puzzle that like has to be solved with optimum move here, move here, move here, move.
Mm-hmm.
But and then complete randomness, like roll
that
dice.
could completely destroy you and make it impossible. And then add in an hour-long setup time
right.
with a loss on the first turn.
So this game, you know, it kind of moves that needle or whatever. I mean, like, or whatever you want to say, where it's like it does that same thing where you really essentially have to do those things in the right order, in the right way, after you know what's going to happen, without having you make. I mean, there's a considerable amount of randomness in this game, as we've covered, but like, it isn't the same beast in that way, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have that whole.
And the story is much more satisfying here. I mean, the nature of the stories and the richness.
I agree 100% on that. Yeah, and
Are
the
you-
art doesn't hurt either.
Yeah.
So. All right, so I think we've beat this to death. Jesse, what do you think is your final thoughts here?
I'm going to start out with my rating of this game. I'm going to give it
rebel here,
Yeah.
going out of order.
So I'm going to give this game a 9. I loved it, and as has happened with some of
9,
our other
really?
reviews, yeah.
He told
Like,
me off camera.
I don't know if it would have started out at 9, but sometimes when we have these discussions, like we get rolling, and an hour and 30-minute discussion makes me realize how much depth
Well,
there
let
is.
me make a quick comment on that, as I think that like that's a no-brainer because you are a big fan of story in games.
I am, but I don't like just story. And that's a great segue to why I feel so strongly about this game. It feels to me like this is almost 2 games in one. There's a very fun narrative story element, especially with this Chronicle, which has got these deep stories. But it's this replayability of this tight sort of Euro optimization game and the marriage of those two, and the fact that replaying a story makes you plan for it more efficiently. That really works for me. And being able to marry those two is very hard to do. It's easy to make a narrative game that sucks as a game, but it's got a story. It's very hard to make those both match. And I have a hard time thinking of another game that does it as well as this. So that's the big thing. But the other thing is, we talk about consumable games. And for me, there's 6 Chronicles here, right? If you played each Chronicle twice, 3 times. Some of these are going to take you 3 more times, and maybe mixed in a little of these assignments, and you got 18 good games out of this. I would be thrilled, even if I never played them again. And then if you imagine it's very modular, you could have expansions for this very easily. I would be dying to play more expansions, and I can't wait to play more Chronicles.
So
and
let me
hear
weigh
more
in on this thought that was the thing that I said off camera. Jesse loves to steal my little things. But yeah, I mean, you can see we're all consumers, right? We're like, buy more and more games. But this, very easily, you could have a promo that's 1 deck of a new Chronicle.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Or you could have, you could bring out new other tokens and pieces or something. I don't think you need any new boards or anything. But yeah, certainly.
Just new Chronicles
Just some
and
new,
stuff.
just a big fat deck of cards.
So let me just sort of not sum up, but maybe make some recommendations. If you like this game, you like this type of narrative puzzle and replayability to get a puzzle, 2 games come to mind for me. Paleo, which is a much shorter, quicker game, we've talked about, and Legends of Andor, which is sort of on the opposite side, a much longer setup, much more focus on puzzly nature. But both of those would be games to check out if you like this. And yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, I guess for me, I think that this is either or. I would agree. And now I see why you decided. You told me specifically you wanted to go first because you took a lot of my
Sometimes it matters.
recommendations. You took a lot of the things
Sometimes it
I was
matters who
gonna
goes
say.
first.
Yeah, it does. I think I know, the cobwebs have been removed. I now see your plan here. No, but I think definitely, I think that it could be either. You could use it as a consumable game, or you can, have it and play it a lot. And I think that dual nature of it is pretty interesting. I think, who's going to like this game? I think if you really hate randomness, you hate those events, this game might not be for you because there is a significant amount of randomness, but not in the way of like Elder Sign where it just seems like you're throwing dice and it doesn't matter what you do. Cue the people that love it, Elder Sign, but I kind of think there's a pretty good amount of chaos. So those people won't like it. I do think that you could get a group that really wants to replay the scenario over and over again and make it harder and remember that stuff and use that efficiency engine and really try to eke out that win. Or you could just sit around with beer and pretzels and you could go around the table taking quick turns, laugh and see, oh, that's cool. Enjoy with the story. Who cares? So I think that kind of worked for both groups. I don't think it's so heavy that a family couldn't play this. I think they would fall more in that beer and pretzels category maybe. I don't think younger kids and stuff are going to maybe know how to like really edge out those like that efficiency engine.
But they could enjoy it.
But they could enjoy it, and they would like, you know, and especially like the pieces and stuff. I mean, I think that it looks nice and stuff, and that would be kind of evocative. I do think, like Jesse said, this game made me immediately think of Legends of Andor, which I said before. Paleo, such a very similar feel to that. And then, of course, like, you know, we only really played one game of Arkham Horror 3rd Edition, but it really reminds me of Arkham Horror 2nd Edition. So that kind of a game, are like Eldritch Horror, where you're kind of going and having these little story encounters, these micro stories type things. So it's in that whole vein. I think in general, this game I think is quite good. It's got a lot of very interesting things going for it. I do really enjoy that story aspect to it. And then I do like going through it again and playing that sort of, you know, that efficiency engine, like, okay, well, now we're going to plan how we're going to win this. I think in general, I kind of like those like nuts and bolts games where you're kind of like, you know, you're like, I'm going to go here and do this, and I'm going to feel good about that action. And I think this game misses some of that because you kind of feel like you're, I don't know how to explain it. It's just, you feel like you're kind of like drifting through a lot of this sometimes. I don't know how to explain that, but it lacks some of that coordination and planning that's real nuts and bolts that I really like to see in a game. So I'm going to give it an 8.
Okay, that's pretty high.
Because I do love, I mean, that's a great rating for a game. I mean, I do love a lot of things going on in here, but it does lack a little bit of that satisfaction that I think, I love a story in a game, but I definitely want more. I think I want it to go more towards that, like, you know, specific actions and stuff. And I think you kind of fall more on the side of like, where you want to see a really interesting, engaging story. And I think that like this game is a perfect kind of like barometer for us, you know, as gamers, I think. But
you'd like to play the rest, some of those other Chronicles.
Oh, absolutely. I really want to see what those are like. And I think the story is very well, it's well written, and it's surprising. So I think it's quite good. So it is, I mean, I'm eager to see what the rest of those entail, which is a good sign of a game. If you want to see us play through the opening scenario, if you have played it yourself, or you want to see how we play it, or you just feel like you could watch that opening scenario, I think definitely check out that.
And check out our short before you buy it video.
You don't need that. You've already made it to the end of this.
That's true.
Yeah, you have no need for that. So, yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us today. You wondered if I was going to screw that up.
It's good to be back filming, and we'll see you guys next time. Yeah, that's the most important thing you say here, to advertise our other stuff.
Well, I like the other things I said too.
Okay.
Quite a little easier. But that was a weird noise.
All right, Greg, stay on target.
Yeah, but that was like not good. That's like a...
We'll edit it out in post.
You're not gonna. And the art is done by Vincent Dutray, who has done...
The first time I got the credit for knowing the art. The second time I got like partial credit, and now you like eliminate any possibility that I get any credit for knowing the art.
It's one of our little games we have.
And the whole point for me is the consumable nature. So like if I can play those 6 scenarios twice each, I'd be thrilled. And if there are more scenarios come out in expansion, I would be dying to play those.
Oh, well, you didn't tell me that you had that to say.
Well, I mean, that's like my whole thing is about the consumable nature. Sorry, I'm telling you now. I thought it was a need to know basis, but now you need to know.
I do need to know.
So I mean, I guess that explains why I felt like that was a final thought statement to
me. It
make.
makes no sense to me why we were talking about expansions, but you're like, oh, by the way, this is the core of everything I'm going to talk about. Well, obviously now it makes more sense. You're like, you didn't like tell me like,
okay.
Oh, the food is hot. Okay. So just
there's gonna be a lot of outtakes in this one.
All right, ready? All right. So one thing I'd like to say, I think that this game has consumable nature and that expansions are coming. That's all the time we have for today. See you next time.
I wonder how anyone survives these buddy movies and shows.
Ready? Mm-hmm. Okay. Ready?
It's fun, but this is fun.
It's fun. Yeah, it is fun. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad we're doing this together.
Me too. Well, that's very nice of you to say.
Our little honeymoon period ended for a while, but I think we're back on track.
Mm-hmm.
Other than the Martin Landau thing.
We can't wait to use that.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
I reprogrammed the simulation so it was possible to rescue the ship.
What?
He cheated.
I changed the conditions of the test. Got a commendation for original thinking. I don't like to lose.
Then you never faced that situation. Faced death.
I don't believe in the no-win scenario.